The NFL Combine is next week, and the Indianapolis Colts are ready to evaluate the prospects. So, which talents can help amplify Shane Steichen's offense? Who will stand out as possible fits to help the Indianapolis Colts, with Chris Ballard emphasizing so much on the draft? And which offensive players would you, the fans, like to see in the Circle City come draft time? Let's talk about it. Welcome to the Horseshoe Huddle Podcast presented by Indianapolis Colts on SI.com. I am Drake Wally, deputy editor of the channel and co-host of this show. And of course, I am joined by none other than fellow analyst on the site and co-host of the podcast, Noah Gebert. Noah, this is an exciting time to be any NFL fan. This is when the futures of every NFL roster kind of start to get churning a little bit. It's such a long and drawn out freaking process, but this is really where the offseason begins. It's the combine, and it's this evaluation process. The Senior Bowl is in the past. Now it's going to be the big dogs, the real popular guys that maybe weren't at the Senior Bowl. Now you can throw them into the mix here for us to talk about. How are you doing, man? Are you excited about the combine? I know that we're both going to be there.
Yeah, I'm great, buddy. You mentioned it's a great time for fans of the NFL and how the combine's coming. I think it's even greater of a time for fans of the Indianapolis Colts, just because the combine's here in Indianapolis every year, and I know they've been clawing tooth and nail to hold it here as long as they can before it goes on tour, inevitably, like the NFL draft. But yeah, I mean, it's in Indianapolis. I think it's Indianapolis next year. I think that's been renewed already. We're going to enjoy it as long as we can. Because what a great week having everybody from the NFL circles and the media and the players and all this, the front office, everybody downtown in Indianapolis for a few nights that week. It's just awesome to see.
Yeah, and it's a hell of a time because this is where you see so much networking happening. You see so many prominent people like your Tom Pelisseros, your Ian Rappaports. I mean, good Lord, everybody who's anybody in the NFL media world is there. Anybody who's anybody coaching, scouts, former players. I mean, I saw so many people a couple years ago that it's actually pretty insane who all is there. But yeah, we've already got Patrick Rye. He gave just everybody go check him out in the chat, because otherwise we could dedicate an entire episode to Patrick Rye's evaluation process. He's got QBs, he's got running backs, wideouts, tight ends, offensive tackles, interior linemen, and even honorable mentions, which says whoever stats Matt thinks should be added. So that's fantastic. Sean Cockright, thank you so much. Hello to you. We got Hustle Man Jones saying combine next week. That's right. One step closer to Tyler Warren. And Richie Dyer, where is Andrew at? So Noah is the new co-host of the show. Andrew took a step back, respectively, to focus a little bit more on his family. So this is the new duo of the Horseshoe Huddle podcast. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining in. The way that we're going to do this is there's so many prospects here that we couldn't possibly fit them into one episode, defense and offense. We had to split this thing up. So we're going to start with the offensive side of the football. And really, Noah, before we even get going here, we'll do what we always do on these lists. But this time we're going to start with Noah, and we're going to just snake down. We each have 5, and hopefully we can try to keep it under an hour. I am now well aware that we are so good at talking that we just can't keep it under an hour. But what is your thought on this offense? I know that we're not going to really talk about a quarterback here. Full disclosure, everybody. We feel like that competition is probably going to be through free agency. But the state of the offense doesn't seem to necessarily be that bad, but they definitely have some holes that need addressing.
Yeah. Well, first off, I'll just start there at quarterback, where we've got Anthony Richardson there, and Chris Ballard has gone on record saying that they need to add competition there. Free agency seems like the most likely route. Draft, I mean, it's a possibility, but here we're talking about things we're excited to see at the combine. When you're talking quarterbacks at the combine, you're not getting a ton of looks. You're trying to chart like how accurate they were throwing on air to receivers they've never seen before. So, I mean, you're not getting a big telling at the combine either way. So while we may be excited about some of those prospects at the quarterback position and the potential they might have to add some competition to that QB room, we're not so much here. The combine, we're kind of focused a lot on the skill players and a couple of guys in the trenches here that we're going to be going around talking about. And outside of the quarterback position of the offense, I mean, pretty much every position could use some a little bit of love. I'm not going to say that every position needs a complete overhaul, like the tight end room does, for example. Running back, you're probably just looking for a complementary piece. A wide receiver, you might like what you have already there, but if you have the opportunity to grab something special, maybe you go there. And then offensive line, you're always looking for depth, and depending on how free agency goes and how the Colts retain their or don't retain their own guys, maybe you're looking for a spot starter here or there also.
Yeah, and there's just plenty of areas to address. So we're going to go ahead and start off with this thing. So Noah is going to give his first one here. And it's a position that doesn't really get talked about enough, but yet
Mhm.
we have three guys out of the 10 that are in this position group. You can always use more of them. So Noah, go ahead and kick us off. Let us know who your first player to watch at the NFL Combine is on the offensive side.
Yeah, so my first player here is Luther Burden III, wide receiver out of Missouri, which I know is going to require the number 14 pick if he falls that far. So this isn't like a day 2, day 3 kind of selection that maybe you might be looking for. I know there would be a lot of Colts fans that would be upset if the first round pick was spent on a wide receiver, a la Philip Dorsett of the past, where maybe that's the sexy playmaking option, but when it comes down to it at the core, that's not what the offense necessarily needs to take it to the next level. Luther Burden here, I think, could be an exception. He's definitely that flashy kind of guy. But I think he can be there's been a lot of talk in the Colts fan base of how they're missing a wide receiver one. And although he's not that prototypical like X receiver that's 6'2", 210, he's going to be a little bit on the smaller side. I think kind of as an NFL audience, we're moving past that discussion of is he too small to play the position when you have guys like Josh Downs, you have guys like Tank Dell, you've got guys like Devontae Smith. You even had that conversation a little bit with Malik Neighbors last year of whether he was big enough to be this full-time X or outside guy. So I don't think you need to have that conversation with Luther Burden anymore. So this combine, we're just kind of looking what kind of an athlete is he in terms of are those numbers really going to stand out in terms of I imagine he's going to be pretty quick in the shuttle and the 3 cone. His change of direction is going to be good. He just moves a little bit differently than a lot of the other players in this draft class. And he's a guy who's been used outside, been used in the slot, can throw him in the backfield. He's kind of just like this playmaking threat. Maybe in the NFL, you don't necessarily have to use him in the slot exclusively like it seemed like Missouri did, just because Missouri, that was the threat on offense was Luther Burden, and they were just trying to be creative and getting him the ball in as many ways as possible. So I don't necessarily think he falls under that conversation of slot only or gadget player only. I think if you play him outside and dedicate that time outside, he could end up being a Garrett Wilson type of player on the outside for you.
If you can have that kind of comp at the end of the day for a receiver, that's a hell of a draft pick.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen what Garrett Wilson can do. He's made some of the most miraculous, spectacular catches I've ever seen on a football field. But look, man, 192 receptions in his time at Missouri, 2,263 yards, 21 receiving touchdowns. But he had 34 rushing attempts for 234 yards, which that's like 6 or 7 yards a carry. And then on top of it, he had another 4 scores on the ground. I looked up NFL Draft Buzz. He was compared to Kadarius Toney, which, look, I get where people are going to go with that. He's absolutely crazy, all right? But, like, when you look at the raw ability of Kadarius Toney, what an absolute menace that guy could be, So I think that this is a pick where if you're really wanting, I think they're going to make this selection if they're unsure about AD Mitchell.
Yeah.
I think that it's going to be a selection where they're like, look, we aren't 100% sure on where AD Mitchell is at. I don't know if they're going to use a 14th overall selection on Luther Burden, but if everything falls in line, I mean, the Colts might be in a position also where there's so much that's needed that they might take best overall player available.
Yeah.
So I like that. My question for you is, do you think that he could potentially, if they drafted him, do you think that he could beat out AD Mitchell for that wide receiver 4 role? Because I definitely think it goes Pittman, Downs, and Pierce right now.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine if you're drafting somebody 14th overall, you're assuming that he's going to be ahead of AD Mitchell regardless. Maybe ahead of Alec Pierce, even in the pecking order, where you're just kind of relegating Alec Pierce to that deep threat And
Sure.
you're keeping Luther Burden on the field as much as possible. He's not going to be that dominant run blocker. I think that's why Alec Pierce tended to get a ton of snaps, is because he was so consistent in the run game, being a helpful run blocker. But just yeah, in terms of people already on the roster, if you're taking a receiver at 14, I think you're really paying attention to the kind of player that is, and whether he's just going to be a true impact player at the position, because you're not really trying to fill out depth at this point. I know we've got a couple of receivers coming on later in the show, where maybe aren't going to be necessarily that high impact wide receiver one or two kind of guy right from the get go, and it's more kind of depth. But yeah, I think when you're talking about those guys, I think that conversation that you were bringing up about AD Mitchell comes even more into play.
Yeah, and look, at the end of the day, the guy got wide open all the
Mhm.
time. He just really struggled with catching the football, which at the end of the day, that's what you pay a wide receiver to do. So if they pick Luther Burden, I think that you can say that, look, they're very, very unsure about AD Mitchell, especially a 14th overall selection. But now we're going to get to another skill position here on the offensive side of the football. This might be my favorite pick.
Mhm.
Or one of my favorite guys to watch, because I got to get out of the draft mentality here. One of my favorite guys to watch at the combine, and that's Arizona State's Cam Scatterbo. Um, this dude is a monster. He's just a beast of a running back, but he can catch the football. Okay, he can get open in space, and then he's just an absolute chore to try to tackle. First off, he was fifth in the Heisman voting. All
Mhm.
right, and we're talking about some. They give it to quarterbacks, right? Like it's a quarterback award for the most part. But 2024 was an interesting season for him. 293 attempts. We're talking like 12, 13 games. Okay, like 14 games. Regardless, it's like 20 carries a game. Dude knows how to take on a workload for 1,711 yards. That's like 5.8 a clip. This is a
Yeah.
dude that when he hits you, you know it. And you're the person that's supposed to be dealing the tackles. And he also had 21 rushing scores, but also threw in 45 catches for 605 receiving yards and three more touchdowns. To give people perspective on how damn good that is, Evan Hall, who led the entire NCAA as a running back in catches his final season, he had like 55 for Northwestern. Okay, like this is a dude who is a monster. And you want to talk about a complimentary back to Jonathan Taylor. This is a guy who could be honestly at his height, the potential of three down running back, and he can still catch the football. This will address everything that is needed behind Jonathan Taylor. I know that there's J.K. Dobbins is on the market, and there's a couple other guys that could be that quote unquote nice handcuff or that nice complimentary piece to go back to Zach Moss and what he was able to do. I love Scatterbo. I think that he can make an impact on this offense, and I think that your mouth is watering if you're Shane Steichen, because this dude is a problem when he's carrying the football as a traditional running back, and he can also catch the football, and he's big enough to be able to pass block too. What are your thoughts on him? I just think that Jonathan Taylor, while he is still going to get the bulk of the carries, you got to have some relief, and it has to be better than Trey Sermon and Tyler Goodson.
Yeah, and we're talking into draft season here. When you're thinking about these draft picks, you're not exclusively thinking about how they'll operate on your team next season, and you're planning for the future beyond that. Uh, that brings up an interesting conversation about Jonathan Taylor, who's 26 years old coming up this season, which you shouldn't have an issue with. Depending on, or based on what you saw at the end of last season, you should expect going into next season that Jonathan Taylor will be Jonathan Taylor going in. But just by the way that position goes and the way that the NFL goes, that's not going to last forever. He'll be 27 next year, and you have an out in his contract next year. Well, you'll save $13 million if you move on from him, and maybe that's when you want to have a guy like Cam Scatterbo on the roster, where he's that three down guy, and you feel comfortable with him kind of taking over that workhorse role. And it may not be in the same kind of way that Jonathan Taylor was doing it, in his ability to hit home runs and that breakaway speed, because I don't think Scatterbo has that. I think at the combine he'll test pretty well, like we mentioned with Luther Burden in the three cone in the shuttle. I think he'll change directions really well. I imagine he'll jump well, but that breakaway speed's not going to be there like it is with Jonathan Taylor. So you're obviously not going to be trading a 1-for-1. You're not going to feel like We already have Cam Scatterbo, so there's no reason to keep Jonathan Taylor on the roster. That's not the conversation that you're going to be having. But in terms of year one, being that complimentary guy, like a Zach Moss was last year or 2 years ago at this point, with Gardner Minshew, with Jonathan Taylor missing so much time, I think he gives you a little bit more than Zach Moss does. Where Zach Moss was super effective as a runner, but in the pass game, I think Scatterbo can offer you a little bit more there. So yeah, I think really an ideal running back two and potentially running back one as the time goes on.
Yeah, and I mean, we got to. I got to get to a couple of these since we're talking about running backs. Look, Stats Matt has a guy that, full disclosure, I was this close to putting in place a Cam Scatterbo, and that's Devin Neal from Kansas. That dude is awesome. I mean, we're talking about his last two seasons, 422 carries. By the way, this is presented by Busch Light. Uh, 422 carries, 2,452 yards, 34 touchdowns. Wow. 49 catches, 471 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 fumbles, and 126 missed tackles forced. Of course, Sarah Small, thank you so much, Sarah, loves Caleb Johnson. Sarah is a big Iowa fan, I believe an Iowa alum, so that is not a surprise, Sarah. Thank you so much. And then we do have, so one more from Stats Matt, Stat 3. We'll get to the other one because it's more relevant for another position. But Rashard Smith, 235 runs, 1,332 rushing yards, 12 touchdowns, 39 catches for 327 yards, and another 4 touchdowns. He also has returning prowess, struggled with some blocking. But look, man, this is a position that, while Jonathan Taylor does dominate it, you're going to have to take him out of the game at some point. We saw that impact with Zach Moss. They were able to, especially against the Cleveland Browns in 2023, they used both of those guys like on 18 carries apiece. And it really put the Browns' number one defense at the time in an absolute blender. They had no idea how to handle just 2 fresh running backs getting rotated in. Not saying that's the case, for 2025, but I think that Scatterbo has a place on this offense, but we're going to have to see. So we're going to go ahead and keep the conversation right here at the running back spot. This next one is a very interesting prospect, kind of the same type of fit for the Indianapolis Colts. Go ahead, Noah, with your next one.
Yeah, so that's going to be Dylan Sampson, running back out of Tennessee. I know there's a ton of running backs that we could have put on this list. You mentioned being really close to adding Devin Neal. See this comment here by Kyle Stewart saying so many great running backs. We could easily get a great one in rounds 4 to 6.
Exactly.
Great might be a strong word, but I mean, yeah, you're going to find people that can, for the role that the Colts are looking to fill right now as that running back too. You can find them later than what you would need to do to get Cam Scatterbo on your roster. Dylan Sampson might be kind of around that same round 2 to 3 range like Scatterbo would. So we're not dipping too far into the coffee pot for him. You've just got a guy, I think, who's going to have that breakaway speed like Jonathan Taylor has. He's obviously not as talented of a runner. So Scatterbo and Dylan Sampson, when you're comparing these two, I included Dylan Sampson on the list because I think going into Combine Week, it's going to be super interesting seeing how he runs. And I tried to kind of veer that way with some of these selections in terms of like what guys are here on this list that I want to see certain numbers from. There's obviously going to be guys at this position like Devin Neal, like you mentioned. I prefer Devin Neal, but I'm not so concerned about what he's running at the combine next week. Whereas Dylan Sampson, I want to see some guy who's known for his breakaway speed as a speedster back. I want to see what he runs, and I know that Chris Ballard values those numbers at the position also. So yeah, we're paying close attention to this. When I was just comparing, because they're kind of ranked similarly, him and Scatterbo, it's kind of hard to find an area where most things say that Sampson is better than Scatterbo at, aside from that breakaway speed. He's not as prolific as a receiving threat as Scatterbo was. He only had 25 targets last season. But he graded really well as a pure runner, a one-cut runner who can put his foot in the ground and get upfield. And I think in the Colts scheme, they would value that.
Yeah, and I mean, you're looking at his 2024, and it was absolutely it was pure insanity. The guy had 1,491 yards on the ground, 22 touchdowns. I mean, the guy can make it happen. A 5.8 yard per carry average. He was just chunking yards. Now, obviously, Tennessee was playing good football. I mean, don't get me wrong. He was not on a bad football team. but neither was Cam Scatterbo. Now, most of these guys were on at least halfway decent teams. I think that this is another fit. If he does play well at the combine, or if he does perform well at the combine, which I assume that most of these guys that we put on this list, they're going to at least show you glimpses of why we put them on there. Now, he's really not much of a receiving back,
Mhm.
but that's also okay because you're probably looking at adding maybe another. Maybe you do keep Tyler Goodson as your receiving back, but I'll tell you right now, you need to have a better backup than Trey Sermon. You
Yep.
just have to. You cannot have under 3 yards a carry, slow feet, not able to break tackles. Being as big as Trey Sermon is, he's just weirdly not good at breaking tackles or forcing more yards and delivering those brutalizing runs. So I like this one. I thought that, Tennessee's offense was really electric at times. And, this is one of the biggest reasons why, because you had to stack the freaking box and you had to stop this man from running the football. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think that it's going to be interesting who, if they do go any direction at running back. But all these guys are going to be on my radar.
Yeah.
There's like 10 to 15 running backs that you could easily just set yourself to watch at the combine. So this next one has one heck of a story. We won't really get into the story. Everybody already knows this man's story, and that's Jack Beck from TCU. Played very well during Senior Bowl week. Made some really awesome catches. He's a guy that's probably not going to be a big play dude, but he's consistent. And, in his 2024 season, obviously he started at LSU, but during his 2024 season, he had 62 catches, 1,034 receiving yards, 9 touchdowns. I'm intrigued to see what he's going to do with the testing. I think that it's going to be really fun to watch Beck because not only is his story awesome, but he's a hell of a football player, and he's going to be one of those guys that I think that you can put in the slot. You could probably put him outside. He's going to be a versatile receiver. He could probably even do some blocking for you because he has that kind of mentality. I really like, Hustle Man Jones. So I'll just go ahead and say it. His brother was a victim in the terrorist attack in Louisiana, basically with the truck. So, he's had to bounce back from that. And then he went over and put on a hell of a show during Senior Bowl week and then had a good Senior Bowl game.
He was
So,
honorary captain at the Super Bowl then too.
Yeah.
Before he even entered the league.
Yeah, this is a guy that is a born leader, and he's been through adversity, which those two things you can't put a price tag on in the NFL. You really can't. And I think that he's going to be really awesome to watch at the combine. What are your thoughts on Beck? And what do you think that he might be able to offer the Colts if they ultimately were to select him? Because he's definitely not going to be a first round pick.
Yeah, I think this is the kind of guy that would fall under that backup to Michael Pittman type role. Where I guess it would be the Z in Shade Steichen's offense, who's going to be your possession guy. He's not necessarily going to be the biggest separator, like A.D. Mitchell. We mentioned his proficiency in getting away from coverage and finding open areas and then not catching the ball. It seems like Beck is kind of the opposite, where he maybe not be the strongest athlete and he didn't create a ton of separation in college, so I don't expect that to get any easier for him going into the NFL until he develops his game a little bit. But yeah, we were talking about his story. I think the real story that we need to talk about with him is 91 targets and 1 drop, which is kind of the opposite of what you saw with A.D. Mitchell this past season. Contested catch guy, so he's going to be strong at the catch point. 65% contested catch rate, which is super high for a receiver. And then his receiving grade was an 83.1 according to PFF, which you could take stock into that, but in terms of his receiving grade against man coverage, that's where the drop was at 71.9. So he's a lot better against zone and finding those soft spots there and bringing in the passes against zone defense than he was straight up beating somebody lined up across from him in man coverage. But yeah, I think that's kind of about where he would fill in the Colts offense. I think would be that kind of Michael Pittman role where he might be a high volume kind of guy. But you're kind of scheming up those plays for him instead of him making them on his own.
Yeah, and that's perfectly fine because if you're picking Jack Beck, you're picking him to be a depth receiver. You're
Mhm.
not asking this guy to go out there and do otherworldly things. Maybe he could turn into something that's a really nice backup option because again, Michael Pittman played through a fractured back. This is a guy that is going to play through injury, whether you want him to or not, and who knows how recovered he will be up to this point. Hopefully 100%. But I just think that the story, the leadership ability, the fact that the guy was able to go out there and play after switching schools. I just think that he would be a really interesting. I think he'd be a really interesting fit for the Colts, and he's going to be a guy that I'm pretty excited to watch at the combine. This is interesting from Kyle Stewart. Need someone to replace Doolin if they don't re-sign him. Play special teams, but can be trusted in the offense in a pinch. I think that's Beck. That's a guy like Beck that could potentially fill that role. Maybe not this deep threat like Doolin is, because there's been times where Doolin, I mean, he's a bigger guy than you think, and he runs really fast. And he's made like over 15 special teams tackles as a freaking wide receiver, which is just awesome.
If God sculpted a gunner on special teams, he would sculpt Ashton Doolin, where he's just blazing straight line speed and that 6'1", 210-pound frame. He's ideally made for that.
Exactly. So that's a really interesting point there, Kyle. I like that you put that. But this next one here, the one that we're going to get to is one that I think that some fans are going to kind of be like, who? But when you think about the area that Noah's about to cover here, you need depth. Okay, there's certain guys that are free agents. You don't even though there's names where you're like, you got to re-sign this guy. You have no idea what they're really going to do. They might look at a contract and say, oh no, we can find this replacement in the draft. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is going to be Tyler Booker, the guard out of Alabama. And this conversation for the purposes of this show is excited to watch him at the combine. I am, because I think he's an animal.
Sure.
He finds work. He's got heavy hands. He's fun to watch. He really is a fun to watch offensive lineman. But the conversation in terms of where the Colts come in, that changes a little bit depending on what happens when we go into free agency or before free agency. When it comes to Will Fries, when it comes to Ryan Kelly, kind of how you handle those guys. Even if it comes to Braden Smith, I know he's a guard. One thing I wanted to mention about him is coming into the combine, I do kind of want to see how his arms measure out. I don't think many people are projecting him to bump outside to tackle in the NFL. I think he played under 100 snaps to tackle, but filled in a little bit there at Alabama this past season. Maybe he has that ability. The Braden Smith was drafted out of Auburn to play guard for the Colts and got switched out to tackle because the need arose during training camp. So, I mean, maybe Tyler Booker, if he comes in 33-inch arms or something like that, he's 6'5", so maybe that arm length would give him the length needed to bump out outside in a pinch if they need. And I mean, that kind of all depends on what goes on with the rest of the offensive line and free agency. If you re-sign Will Fries, like I think a lot of people expect the Colts to do, and he's slotted there at your starting right guard, I don't see that you would draft Tyler Booker there, but if you do and he finds himself on the roster, I think maybe him and Gonsalves have something to say about what goes on at right tackle. But yeah, he would be an immediate starter if the Colts don't bring back Will Fries. You probably have to go around in the second round, draft Tyler Booker. He's a much stronger pass blocker than he is a run blocker. I think he struggles to get to the second level a little bit. He's not the fastest guy, but I mean, he's got heavy hands, 6'5", 325. He's a huge guy, and he looks for work in the pass game, and he's a really, really solid pass blocker.
Yeah, and when you talk about what the Colts might need, even look, it will depend on what they think about Will Fries, right? But this is a guy that when you're going to be watching him in these drills, like it's just like Noah said. I mean, I'm reading his scouting report right here. Devastating power on down blocks, consistently creates vertical displacement with explosive hip drive and heavy hands, like Noah said, that flat out move defenders off their spots. So this is a guy that when he comes off the line, he's going to hit you with hands so quickly that you're going to stumble. And that's all that you need. That's all that you need, especially if in pass pro, he's going to be able to put his heels in the ground and he's going to be able to protect that quarterback. Shows exceptional awareness on stunts and twists, rare ability to process movement while maintaining his base and leveraging his power. Hello, pass blocking. Right there it is. Boom. And then of course he brings consistent violence as a puller, arrives with bad intentions and shows good tracking ability when leading through the hole. So there are times he can do well in run blocking, but it's whenever he needs to use that speed to get to the second level, like Noah said, that's kind of where you're going to see, hey, maybe a little bit slower than you want. But man, at the end of the day, I think that the Colts would probably, let's say that they're, we'll talk draft for a second. If they're at that 14th spot and they don't like what they see, I'm telling you, Chris Ballard is the kind of guy that will be like, nope, and he'll trade back. And this, if they feel like they need an offensive guard to start, this might be it. But he uses, it even says he uses every inch of his 34-inch arms to control defenders before they can get into his chest. So it is those arms that you're going to be a little bit concerned about. They're going to measure him out. And they're probably going to be like, not the arm situation. But I'm excited to see him because like Noah said, he's an animal. He's an animal, and he really is the definition of an offensive guard. We'll have to see. But do you think that he could develop into something really awesome under Tony Sparano Jr.? Because I personally think Tony Sparano Jr. can coach any offensive lineman.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of the profile that you're looking for. I know the Colts, the run game is kind of taking precedence with Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor back there. And I think he can grow in that regard, but you're immediately getting somebody who's going to be an able pass blocker and kind of shore up the interior there for Anthony Richardson, which I think would be super valuable.
Yeah. And so this next one, we're going to start to get into some of these really, really interesting. We're starting to get into some of these more like intriguing names, but I'm just going to go ahead and bring up something from Stats Matt before I even name mine. So the one that I'm going with here next is tight end Mason Taylor. Now, I say Mason Taylor because I feel like there is a lot here with this prospect. Now we're going to go back here to Stats Matt's stat of the day, number 2, presented by Busch Light. We'll say Busch Light Peach this time because Stats Matt loves himself that Busch Light Peach. 55 catches for 546 receiving yards, only 2 touchdowns, but 50-50 inline and split out. That is awesome because this is a guy that that LSU trusted with blocking, and they also trusted him to move outside and compete with some of those defensive backs and linebackers. 17% of snaps were pure pass blocking, 150 pass blocking snaps over the last 2 years, and he allowed 1 sack and 4 pressures. That's pretty impressive from a tight end. Mason Taylor, throughout his career, I think he played 3 seasons, 129 receptions, 1,308 receiving yards, only 6 touchdowns. Of course, the red zone prowess could improve. You want to have a tight end who's going to score you some touchdowns. But he's big, he can move, and he's a usable blocker. He's serviceable. Okay, now is he going to blow your mind blocking? Probably not, but that's also right out of the gate. I can't wait to see how he's going to do these drills because he's a bigger dude, and everybody talks about the new day and age. You've got your Tyler Warren or your Brock Bowers. You've got a guy that is either a bigger dude that can punish you on the inline and you can move him onto the outside, or a guy that's just a pure unadulterated pass catcher who can roast anybody who's covering him. This is a nice balance. This is a guy who's like 6'5". He's going to be able to provide inline play. He's going to be able to provide slot play. You're going to be able to move him around a little bit. He's not just a one-trick pony. And you don't have to invest a first-round pick in him. Okay, I think that the Colts need to maybe not necessarily look at the tight end position through rose-colored goggles. All right, look at a guy that's potentially going to provide you what you need. And this is a running offense at the end of the day. I like Mason Taylor. I can't wait to see how he's going to test at the combine, how he's going to perform at the combine with his hands. I think that he's the sure thing. But, what do you think, Noah?
Yeah, so Mason Taylor's an interesting guy to bring up. You said 6'5". I think he's listed at 255. We'll see what he weighs in coming into the combine.
Big dude.
Chris Ballard likes really good athletes at the position, so we'll see how he tests it in that regard also. In terms of how he was used at LSU, I think he was about 50-50 when it came to whether he was in line as that wide tight end or if he was split out in the slot. I think just by virtue of how the college offense is kind of run, that slot number is a little bit inflated. Maybe you'll see him in line a little bit more in the NFL. which I think is good for the Colts. I think that's a good fit for them. I think Shane Steichen likes to have a guy in line like that. And likes to have a reliable target there. He's pretty good contested catch. It was about 50% contested catch, which is better than average. And another thing that he has in common with Jack Beck, who you mentioned earlier, is that great drop rate, where he had 79 targets and had that one drop. So you're looking at a reliable pass catching threat as well as a willing blocker, and has the frame to be a good blocker. I think he can work on his technique a little bit there. You mentioned those pass block stats were pretty good, and then in terms of the run game, he's got to get a little bit more refined there when it comes to run blocking. But overall, he's that guy that you can slot in right there at that starting wide tight end spot, even if you draft him in the third or fourth round. I think just based on how the Colts position is at tight end right now, the state of that room, a third or fourth round rookie is pushing for a starting job right away, which is not a great position to be in. But man, what a great opportunity, right? If he comes to a team like the Colts.
Yeah, and that's why I feel like it's going to be interesting to see how he tests out. It's going to be interesting to see how he puts it all together, because he is still, I think, if you had to put a label on him, he's probably still more of an inline guy.
Yeah.
His size, his bulkiness, it really resembles more of like Jack Doyle, which I have. How I feel about the tight end position, Noah. Jack Doyle, man, that's like a lunch pail type dude who could basically do everything, and at the height of his powers, could get 80 catches in a season from Jacoby freaking Brissett. So, I mean, that's what the Colts need. They need consistency. They don't necessarily need to try to, take this, in my opinion, this massive, massive swing on a tight end. I do think that you can find talent. This is a deeper tight end class than people think. That's all I'm going to say. It's not all about Tyler Warren. So, but this next one, I do really like this one, and yet it's another skill position, and it's to round out this position. We've already covered two of these guys. A team that got overlooked constantly because there were other big name teams in the NCAA that got all the attention. Go ahead, no, I'm pumped about this one.
Yeah, so this is Trey Harris out of Ole Miss. Almost said LSU there because I was thinking of another receiver, but yeah, Trey Harris out of Ole Miss. This is a guy that you're not really pegging for the Colts. You're thinking maybe third or fourth round, late day 2, early day 3 kind of guy. And with AD Mitchell on the roster, maybe he's not in the cards really. But I put him on here for selfish reasons because I liked watching him play. Just a fun guy. I think it's the 6'3", 210 frame. I think we mentioned Luther Burden earlier, how that's not the frame for a typical X. This is very much so your frame for a typical outside guy. And then I am curious to see what his speed is. He's a deep threat, but I don't know kind of how that top end speed is going to measure up. So I put him on here because I am specifically watching to see what he runs in comparison to some of these other deep threats at the position. He's a really good contested catch guy. Uses his body pretty well. 61.5% contested catch. This is unlike guys we talked about previously in Jack Beck and Mason Taylor. His drop rate is a little bit higher. Pretty below average. I mean, he didn't have a ton of targets, like a ton of sample size, like Jack Beck did with his 98 targets or whatever Jack Beck did. But I mean, he had 5 drops, which doesn't sound like a lot. But when it's on 76 targets, that drop rate is hovering around 8%, which is pretty rough. And then we also had this conversation when Jack Beck came up, how his grade kind of fell off, his receiving grade against man coverage. And Trey Harris is the exact opposite of that, where he had an 89.4 receiving grade, which is very good in and of itself, but then it bumps up to a 95 against man coverage, where he's just a DB beater, where you put him up against somebody and he's gonna perform well in contested catch situations, and he's gonna create separation. Overall, I think he's not really in play for the Colts. I put this one on as kind of a selfish reason here.
Well, no, and that's it's about watching these dudes at the combine, and I'll tell you right now. Actually, real quick, 7. Right now, it's sitting at 7. But as the Colts typically do, Hustle Man Jones, fully expect to trade back at some point. They really like to get their picks. Like last season, I think they had 9, and 3 of them worked out. So, but yeah, man, I mean, this is a guy that he started with Louisiana Tech, and he had his first season in 2020, he only had one catch, but then you're talking about 40, then
Mhm.
65, switches to Ole Miss, continues 54, 60. This is a guy who's consistent, all right? And he's had at least 4 touchdown receptions ever since 2021, hit 10 in his last season with Louisiana Tech. Consistent, consistent, consistent. I really like that she even picked this guy because, while he might not be this flashy receiver that everybody's talking about, he's a guy that can make it happen for a team. I mean, he's going to show you versatility in some regards, but it's really just I know that I'm beating it into a drum here, but when you have a guy who can provide you a stable floor as a receiver, teams take value in that.
Mhm.
And I do think that it's going to be on him to show more than just a consistency factor in the combine, because this is where receivers really do shine. I mean, you have to do so much with all these drills, and that's where you start to really show how fast are your feet, how good are your hands, how good is your route running, how good is your chemistry with a dude that you don't really even mess with, that's throwing you the football. I like that one, and I think that it's probably one that's going to get overlooked a lot, but that's perfectly fair. This next one, I think, was probably one of the more exciting ones, mostly because of that Senior Bowl week, and this is Gray Zabel, offensive tackle, North Dakota State, probably completely off the Colts' radar. He's going to be more of like your maybe like a late first rounder. I think that the
Mhm.
Colts could probably get him if they did trade back and if they just felt like, look, Braden Smith, not the guy. Matt Gonsalves, backup swing tackle. That's the only way that the Colts are going to take an offensive tackle in the first round. And I know that Daniel Jeremiah mocked, I think it's not Embu. Gosh, I'm going to forget his name. The tackle from Missouri mocked him number 14. You only do that if you are giving up on Braden Smith. And if you really feel like Matt Gonsalves is not the answer, because they traded up to get Gonsalves, don't
Mhm.
forget that. But this is a guy that he shined during Senior Bowl week against guys that were bigger than him, guys that should have flattened him. Gray Zabel, all I heard was Gray Zabel, Gray Zabel, Gray Zabel, all Senior Bowl week. Based off his scouting report, he is a technician with controlled violence. So you're talking about a guy that's got the power and he's got the technical ability, cerebral blocker. He's a cerebral offensive lineman, and when you can put all that together, I just think that he's going to be a lot of fun to watch. I think it's going to be great to see him, like his agility drills. How fast is he going to move? But he can also potentially be moved inside to
Mhm.
play. Okay, so like you're talking about that versatility factor. Obviously, you're not going to be taking you're not going to be taking Zabel, at number 14. If you're the Colts, they're probably not even going to take him. But what are your thoughts on him? I mean, he comes from North Dakota State, which is a university that is starting to produce some pretty high level prospects for the NFL.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a guy I think we talked about Tyler Booker. He's more interior, and this guy will be kind of on the outside. Who's going to be a better pass blocker than a run blocker, which is kind of the opposite of where we're at with Braden Smith, where Braden Smith is a dominant run blocker at right tackle. But in pass pro, he's above average, but it's not the same level as he is a run blocker. Uh, so I guess it depends stylistically how they want to switch that up. If they went with a guy like Gray Zabel, but like you mentioned, yeah, probably late first, early second. If he falls to him in the second round at their 14th pick in the second round, then I think it wouldn't be weird for him to come to the Colts, right? Even with the investment that they made in Matt Gonsalves, if Braden Smith doesn't come back, yeah, I think Gonsalves did enough in his short time playing that he earned first crack at the starting job at right tackle. But I don't think he earned it outright, where you go into the season and don't go in with any competition. And if you have an opportunity to add a guy like Gray Zabel to the room, then you do it. Another thing about Zabel is just when we were talking about Tyler Booker and his ability to fill in outside at tackle, what was somewhere under 100 snaps last season. Gray Zabel has spent more time inside at guard, so he has a little bit more position flexibility, where he can play tackle or guard, which is pretty similar to how they've felt about Gonsalves last year. So I mean they've gone with this kind of mold before, and kind of double dipping in that same kind of area. I think it's if he ends up being a swing tackle, maybe you invested a little bit too much for a swing tackle at that spot, but they're not going to be
Yeah.
upset at that. I mean, they always like to have depth on the offensive line. I think I'm kind of at the point, and I think it's this way with a couple positions with Chris Ballard, where I trust it. Right, he hits more often than he misses at these positions. Linebacker's one of them, obviously, where if he takes a guy, it turns out pretty well. Offensive line, he has a really good track record, drafting Braden Smith as a guard, bumping him out to tackle, and he became a plus starter for some time. Will Fries in the seventh was great. Quentin Nelson, I think, was an easy selection for him to make, but he still made it. And then Bernard Ryman in the third round becoming a plus starter at left tackle. That's awesome. Then you've got Bordolini and Gonsalves. Jury's still out on them, but I mean, the evaluations, I think he's hitting more often than not. So Gray Zabel specifically might be out of range for them, or kind of in that sweet spot where they're not going to get him. But in terms of just tackles in general that we'll be watching at the combine, I think they broke the mold a little bit in terms of raw athletic score, the RAS with Gonsalves last year. So I think they're a little bit more open than they have been in the past in terms of just straight freak athletes along the whole offensive line. So maybe that opens them up to some other guys that we maybe wouldn't consider.
Yeah, and I mean, Patrick Rye right here, this was a guy I almost put in his place, was Chase Lund from Connecticut. Another good one. And then Hustleman Jones. So just, I don't know if you were watching somebody different, but Gray Zabel was voted the practice player of the week by NFL executives in attendance during the Senior Bowl. He was dominant, and he was constantly magical. He was a top 50 pick until the Senior Bowl. Now he's a first round projection. So, I mean, this dude's the real deal. And he used the Senior Bowl as his smorgasbord to just serve up a really good sample of fantastic one-on-ones. And I mean, he was putting dudes in their place, but that's neither here nor there. There was a lot of different guys. So, I mean, I'm not sure what you saw, but yeah, I think that this is probably going to be a guy that is out of their range. But we're going to go ahead and get to Noah's next one here. Let me see here. Yeah, so we're going to get to the big position here that the Colts probably need. This is one that is very intriguing. Probably the best receiver, I would say, pure receiver at his position. Probably doesn't get enough credit as a blocker. Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, that's going to be Harold Fannin Jr. out of Bowling Green. I do like that we saved the tight end position for last. I know that's been a hot spot when we're just talking purely offense. I mean, I don't think there's a bigger need on the offense than tight end. So I think it's only right that we save these big two names for last. And I think just by saying big two names, I think people can probably guess who yours is coming up. But we'll talk about Harold Fannin Jr. first, right? So 6'4", 230. I don't think he's your ideal guy to play in line. Kind of the opposite of where we were at with Mason Taylor at LSU. At Bowling Green, he did play more in line than he did in the slot, which is not super surprising. College game's a little bit different, and when you're talking about the level of competition that he faced in the MAC, where everybody's not bigger, stronger, faster than 6'4", 230, I think he could hold his own blocking in line at that level of play. Senior Bowl, he had a little bit of a rough outing, but early on, especially, and then he kind of came around a little bit later in the week. So I'm excited to see, because you're talking about a guy who's going to be kind of a pure receiving threat, split out in the slot more often than he is in line. So you want to see those numbers and how he does changing directions and what his top end speed is going to be like, because it's kind of hard to tell when you're going up against MAC athletes what that tape speed is. So it'll be good to have a good number on him. Contested catch rate, I think Mason Taylor's a little bit stronger in that department. I think pure size helps Mason Taylor out in that regard. The drop rate, I think, is really good. It's a 3.3. He didn't have one drop like Mason Taylor did. So, I mean, I'm just trying to compare him to other people that we've talked about at this position. And the one big stat that always jumps out at me when we're talking about tight ends and their playmaking ability, you watched Brock Bowers last year and how he was able to create after the catch. And that's what made him put up those monster numbers. This guy had the most missed tackles forced out of any tight end in the country last year with 34. I think Mason Taylor was somewhere around 5. So just by comparison there. So when you're talking about people that can extend the play, security blankets usually at tight end who get the ball in the middle of the field a lot. I think Fannon's going to get the ball up the seam quite a bit. But if you're having Anthony Richardson throw quick passes to a tight end, or really any position. You want guys who can make plays after the catch, and I think Fannin is more than anybody else in this class that guy. So I do pay attention to that quite a bit. And then when we're talking about being a run blocker, because if you're going to be on the field for more than 50% of the snaps in Shane Steichen's offense, you're going to have to be a good run blocker. Especially in this iteration of the Colts offense, you're going to have to be a good run blocker. And he graded well. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that that's something that he can continue to improve and put on mass and strength when he gets into an NFL program, and prove that he can be that do-it-all tight end.
Yeah, I mean, his numbers are insane from 2024. 117 catches for
Yeah.
1,555 receiving yards, 13.3 per clip, 10 touchdowns, and 119 yards per game. I mean, hell, he even got 9 rushing attempts for another 65 rushing yards and another score. All-American season. I mean, well-deserved. I think that this is a tight end that, look, he's getting a lot of flack. All right. He's getting compared to Kyle Pitts a lot. And it's like, look, he might be the same type of like build as Kyle Pitts, but that doesn't mean he is Kyle Pitts. And actually, one of his interesting comparisons on draftbuzz.com, it's Cade Stover and Trey McBride, who, by the way, for the Cardinals has been fantastic. This is a guy that's going to test out of the freaking waters at the combine. He's going to look great. He's going to wow a lot of people. At least that's what I think. I think that he's going to, he's probably going to get, knocked for his size a little bit and maybe in some strength drills. But we'll have to see. I do think that this is an intriguing prospect because I'm rooting for him to smash those Kyle Pitts comparisons, because people are just saying it based off of the way he plays and how I guess he might be used in whatever scheme. But do you think that, because I know that you're a Bowling Green guy, but like, do you think that this is a guy that, I mean, if the Colts were to take him, I mean, just think of the possibilities of him and Shane Steichen's offense.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think
like
that position's super valuable in the offense. To have a reliable receiving threat's gonna take it to the next level. I mean, they had their eyes on Brock Bowers by some reports last season. They want to upgrade at that position. They didn't have the firepower to do it if they wanted to trade up or couldn't find the right offer there to do it. They want more firepower on the offense regardless. I think the obvious move is to go tight end in a deep tight end class with a huge glaring need at tight end. There's going to be one selected, right? So it's worth our time on this podcast specifically with how long the offense is to or the offseason is to go through them all one by one, because we're going to talk about one of them in the future at some point. That the Kyle Pitts comparisons, I don't get. I don't think he's the athlete that Kyle Pitts is. And he's not the size that Kyle Pitts is. I think Kyle Pitts is around 250 or whatever. I think Fannin's 230. I think those combine numbers are going to be super interesting for Fannin to see where he measures up. 6'4" he's listed at. He might be a little bit under that. I would need to pull up the Senior Bowl numbers because I'm sure he weighed in there and kind of compare, see if he's putting on a little bit more weight when it comes to the combine, or if he's trying to stay trim and boost his numbers up in the 40 or in the shuttle. Just curious to kind of watch how he progresses throughout this draft process, knowing full and well that he could be a possibility come April.
Yeah, I wouldn't leave any of the maybe top 3-4 tight ends off the out of the realm of possibility. The Colts are going to be watching closely at Lucas Oil. They're going to be watching those tight ends, probably maybe more than any other position. So I think that you cannot scoff away at getting a tight end. I mean, like Noah said, we were talking about Mason Taylor being a 3rd or 4th round pick, and right out of the gate, starter. That just shows the state of this tight end room that had 39 catches between Kylan Grants and Mo Alley Cox, Drew Ogletree, and Will Mallory. Absolutely unacceptable production. The last one, is a name that everybody's going to know, but it's well deserved that he is probably the top at his position, and that's I'm just going to cut right to the chase. It's Tyler Warren. I had no choice but to do this. I know that people. I mean, we at the channel we've wrote so many mock drafts, and it's undeniable that this is a guy that is tied to the hip of the Colts potentially selecting him. However, how will he test at the combine? He's I personally think Tyler Warren's more of a technician than a ridiculous, athlete. A guy like Harold Fannon's probably going to look better in some of these drills. But the thing is, you're getting a complete guy here. And, his 2024 season is one to behold. Say what you want about him. 104 catches with Penn State, by the way, having absolutely, I mean, that wide receiver room, it was Tyler Warren, right? Tyler Warren was the receiving threat for the whole team. 104 catches, 1,233 receiving yards, 8 touchdowns through the air. By the way, some fantastic catches, but 26 attempts for 218 rushing yards, 4 more scores on the ground. This is a versatile football player. At the end of the day, he's going to be able to block. He blocks through the whistle. There's a video of him basically through the whistle, just shoving a dude from the 5-yard line, I think, all the way through the goal line and the end zone, all the way back to the end of it. This is a guy that screams Colts tight end that they need. But multiple guys are going to fit what the Colts want at tight end. You don't necessarily need a Tyler Warren, but I will say that if the Colts either trade up a couple spots to get him, or if they're sitting there at 14 and he's somehow, which I don't think he will be, but if he's somehow still sitting there, I don't think that you can pass him up. What are your thoughts on Tyler Warren? I think he's at least going to impress at the combine, but I don't. People that think he's just going to test out of the waters and be this incredible, combine performer, I don't think that he's that. I think that he's much more of a technician, much more of a grit type guy, and he is a performer. And I think that it's really on Sundays what he's going to show the most.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there in terms of combine and what we're watching. I think he's going to run the 40 and it's going to be a respectable 40 time for a tight end. But I think a lot of fans are going to be like, oh, that's what it was. That's not what we were expecting, just because of all the hype that he's gotten throughout this offseason. He's going to run well. He's going to catch really well, I assume. He's another one that had a really good drop rate. I think that's been a theme with a lot of these guys that we've been bringing up throughout this whole entire episode. Going back to the Harold Fannin conversation where he had 34 missed tackles or forced. That was the most out of tight ends. Tyler Warren was second. It was 19. So, I mean, that gap is pretty big. Tyler Warren's also going against Big Ten defenders and not MAC defenders. Same region, just a lower quality there. But yeah, he's one of those guys that can create after the catch. I don't think he's going to create the same level that Brock Bowers does after the catch. And I think you're going to have a lot of comparisons just based on how they were both far and away the number one prospect at their position. They're probably projected to go in the same kind of range. In terms of just Colts fans and this area, there was so much conversation, so many people linking Brock Bowers to the Colts last year and how mock drafts we're all going to have him. You're going to see the same thing with Tyler Warren all the way up until draft day, where he's going to be constantly mocked to the Colts. And it's not all smoke. The Colts are going to be paying attention to Tyler Warren. It's not a myth that they value the tight end position and they want to make an investment there. So if he's there, I mean, it makes sense. We're going to talk about him until draft time. And then just his size, 6'6" and 255, 260. I don't know what he's listed. He has 6'6", 261 he's listed at. Man. So I do want to see him measure in at the combine and see what those actual numbers are. I mean, it might be right around that. If that's the case, you're talking about a 3-down tight end who's going to be playing snaps in the slot. You're going to feel super comfortable in the run game with him blocking in line with this type of offense. The power running that they're going to be doing and those one gaps that they're going to be hitting with Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor, you're going to have a plus guy there in the run game and in line. And then on top of that, somebody that can motion back, be that H-back, come across the formation and offer a threat as like a shovel pass or a pass across the formation after you do a play action or a read option there. He fits perfectly, and it makes so much sense why the conversation's going to be about him for the next 2 months.
Yeah, and look, this is a position that you cannot take lightly if you're Indianapolis. Your tight ends sucked as pass catchers. All right. I mean, they just did. And you were hoping that Kylan Granson might be able to be the most talented, but he just wasn't. And he fell off a cliff. And look, Anthony Richardson was bad as a passer, plain and simple. Even the most supportive people, you can't deny that he was bad. He has a lot of room to improve too. But like if he can connect on those throws and working with Chris Hess, look better. A guy like Tyler Warren that's going to dominate that seam. He's going to dominate the middle of the field. He's going to be able to work those linebackers, overpower those defensive backs and safeties. I mean, good Lord, he's going to be able to block in the run game. And how about play action, people? He's going to be able to bump with a block and then leak out and just be a nice, simple throw for Anthony Richardson. We'll see, but I'm very intrigued to see how he's going to perform at the combine. And that's all of our prospects. We're going to go ahead and get to the two minuscule updates the minuscule amount of updates for Colts news and rumors. The first one here is that former Colts QB Scott Tolzien was hired as the Saints quarterback coach. Look, just because you were not a good quarterback in the NFL does not mean you cannot be a great quarterback coach. Kellen Moore was not a very good quarterback in the NFL, but he is now the coach of the New Orleans Saints. So I think that you're putting two quarterback-centric guys here to help the position. I like the hire. What were your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, Scott. It's weird to, I think, refer to Scott Tolzien as a former Colt, even though he spent so long everywhere. I don't even really think about it that much. And then as a coach, quarterback coach? He just got hired. He was the quarterback coach for Dallas the past 2 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Which it makes sense.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, no, I'm excited for him. It's not a huge news as far as Colts go, just because he's whatever. But yeah, I mean the Saints.
He's a former Colt.
Yeah. Former Colt. We'll include him here. Shout out to Scott Tolzien and those rough years where he was playing with the Colts.
That's right. Well, this next one's actually important because people will be tuning in. Chris Ballard, 4:30 p.m. and Shane Steichen, 5:30 p.m. are going to be speaking at the Combine next Tuesday. I think that it's much more important to watch what Ballard's going to say because this is where he absolutely loves to try to cook. This is where all of that stuff about the draft and his scouting experience and all that stuff, this is where it starts, is right here at the Combine. We'll just go ahead and say this before we hop off here. This is him and Shane Steichen's jobs are on the line, people. Mm-hmm. Like they are on the line. And so this is going to be, I think, where you're going to see those peepers. They're going to be honed in more than ever with the blinders on. They cannot miss in the draft. They can't miss in the Combine. So far, can't throw out negative comments in the chat, but so far, I mean, you look at Jelani Woods, you look at Juju Brents, you look at A.D. Mitchell, you look at Daniel Scott, and I can't remember who the other one is. Basically, super, super uber athletic players that Ballard likes to go for. None of those guys have been able to stay healthy. Anthony Richardson's the other one. Those are the top 5 most athletic guys the Colts have ever taken since 2010, people. None of them have worked out up to this point. Okay, so I think that Ballard's strategy might be a little different this time. I don't think that he can just try to swing on all these athletes because the guys I just mentioned, they've all had injury issues. I mean, hell, Daniel Scott's missed his first 2 seasons. Jelani Woods has missed the last 2 seasons. Richardson can't stay healthy. Juju Brents can't stay healthy. And then A.D. Mitchell so far, I mean, in his rookie year, it was arguably one of the worst of a receiver in their rookie season last year. So my question to you is, I mean, do you think that this might be one of the most critical, combine evaluations that the Colts have done in recent memory?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Especially, I mean, it'll be the most critical one that Chris Ballard's ever done in his tenure, just because the line he's walking is getting super narrow. I think you brought up a good point where you're talking about those high RAS scores and how they haven't necessarily equated to success on the field or even playing time on the field. We mentioned that when we were talking about linebacker and offensive line, where maybe those are positions that he's hit more often than not. He doesn't really need to reevaluate his scouting process there. Other positions, other things, I think as a whole, he needs to take a look in the mirror of what he's been valuing in the past and use it to make some better decisions. The combine press conferences that are coming up, you're not going to get anything out of Shane Steichen. It's going to be a super boring press conference from Shane Steichen. I'll read the transcript later. I'm not really expecting anything to come out of that. But Chris Ballard's going to be interesting to listen to because he's always honest. He's always left tidbits about what his plans are, and at times it's hard to kind of see. Maybe he's steering into some other things and whatever, but he's honest and he's going to give you like a read on how he feels about certain position groups coming into the combine and what kind of position groups that he's watching and where the strengths are in the draft and areas that the team needs to address. He mentioned that he wanted somebody to help control the middle of the field on offense, kind of indicating that they need somebody on the inside as a receiving threat, either a tight end or a receiver. If he doubles down on that, I mean, I would expect that that's going to be a high priority once again. So yeah, I mean, you're going to get some nuggets from Chris Ballard, so I'll be watching to that a little bit more closely than Steichen's.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting combine. I'm pumped. I can't wait to see these 10 guys and others as we kind of, really get the first look on how the Colts are going to address the 2025 NFL draft. But that's our show. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining in. We had just so much interaction in the chat there. This is always so much fun to talk about the NFL draft, to talk about the combine. Next time on Thursday, we are going to be bringing you the defensive side. And apologies again for the hectic schedule. My daughter turned 1 year old, and I don't freaking understand how that happened. It seems like she was just born a couple months ago, so I'm trying to cope with that. But she had her first birthday on Monday, so I appreciate everybody still tuning in. But yes, like the Horseshoe Huddle on Facebook, follow Indianapolis Colts on SI on X, and subscribe to the Horseshoe Huddle on YouTube. Click that bell to turn on the notifications. If you want to listen to the Horseshoe Huddle podcast, well, subscribe everywhere that you listen to podcasts. We're talking about Apple. We're talking about Spotify. We're talking about Google Play, wherever you do take in your audio podcasts. And of course, if you have any questions or you want to be featured, just throw some comments in the chat. We definitely will do what we can to get to them. But yeah, join us on Thursday. We're going to switch to the defensive side of the football. We're going to continue to talk all things combine. The big day is starting next week, and there's just going to be so much coverage. Tune into Chris Ballard. Maybe not Shane Steichen. Maybe you can just kind of like look at some highlights later, because I'm telling you, you're going to hear fired up. You're going to hear we're doing well. You're going to hear just the most coach speak you've ever heard. But until then, everybody, enjoy your week. Enjoy your Wednesday. We will be seeing you again live on the show Thursday at 7 p.m. As always, Colts fans, thank you so much, and we'll be seeing you then.